Hey, this is Derek. I'm going to make this video talking about how to know if your novel is done or when to know if your book is done. I think this question came up a while ago and I'm not sure if I made a video about it. And I'm mostly making this video to procrastinate because I've been editing this book that I'm working on for a long time. So I want to talk a little bit about my writing process, where I am right now, and how you get to that point where you know your book is ready to be shared with other people. So I actually had to go back and check Facebook to see when I finished this book. And by finished, I mean got to the end and wrote the final chapter. So all the scenes, I know what happens, they're all down on paper. That was May 27th. Now it's July 12th. So I think like at the end of May, I had, finished this book and I thought I'm going to go through and edit it in a couple weeks. And then I'm going to finish one or two more novels in June. Instead, I've been just revising this one book all June, and now I'm going into the second week of July, and the book is still not done. So this is very frustrating when you think you finished a book and there's so much work to be done. A lot of people get stuck in the edits, or they don't fully appreciate how much time it's going to take. And I should know better because I go through this process a lot, and I'm always really slow in edits. That's going to depend on your writing style. Some people, they write a really clean, not even clean, but they write a good first draft with most of the stuff in place. They'll send it out to an editor to do the polish for them. And there's a whole can of worms to get into with editing and proofreading and what it means. But basically, if the story is there and you've written it well, it might be possible for an editor or a proofreader just to fix the mistakes and publish it and be ready to go. That's not my style of writing. And so when I finished this, what I thought was the final scene, like I have it down on paper, I know what happens. Actually, the manuscript is still a really big mess. There are gaps, and it may be written, but it's not written well. And so the revision process takes, for me, probably as long or longer than the writing process. I can write 1,000 or 2,000 words an hour, and editing is about the same for me, 1,000 or 2,000 words per hour, except I'll probably go through the same manuscript about 7 times. And I have resources on YouTube about my editing process, and I talk about in my courses, which is basically a three-pass editing structure where I'll go through it 3 times, focusing on different things, which would be great. But actually, in practice, it takes me probably 7 times to go through it. So, if you think of a 70,000 word novel is going to take you 50 hours to write, 50 to 100 hours to write, but it might take you at least 100 hours, but probably 200 or 300 hours to edit, depending on how much work needs to be done. So in June, I went through and I tried to finish the scenes. I thought I'd finish the scene. So once you basically know what's going to happen, you have to go back through and fill in the gaps or add all the transitions or the motivations, because what happens isn't really enough. You have to put in, how did you get there? Kind of like showing your work in old English classes or whatever. So I did a lot of that. And then a couple weeks ago, I put the book on pre-order because I figured, okay, I've been through it a couple times. I know that everything is there. So now I just need the final polish. So I set up on pre-order a couple weeks ago, giving myself what I thought was enough time. And now I'm probably about 48 hours away from that pre-order deadline. So there's a ticking clock on KDP where it's telling me you have, 36 more hours to upload your manuscript. I think I have like two more days, which is obviously stressful. And it's, like I said, hard to predict how much editing a book is actually going to take. So you may not want to do that. For me, it helps me to get the work done. It feels exhausting that I've been working all day, every day for 6 weeks on this one book. So here's where things get kind of interesting is that normally I would say you may not want to fiddle with the tiny details. I have had author clients who the book is basically done, but they'll spend months and months going through and changing little phrases or little words or, cleaning it up. If it's a typo, grammar mistake, then yeah, it should be fixed, and there's always going to be a bunch of those. But if it's just a little bit of like a touch up or rephrasing, readers aren't really going to care about the words. So I don't think you should spend, like, it's not the difference in value of a book is not those extra little words. So if you spend 6 more weeks or months polishing the fine little details, it's not going to make a significant impact on readers' appreciation of the story, which means the value doesn't increase. So rather than spending 6 weeks on the same book, you could have written another book and finished the trilogy sooner. That's what will move the needle. That will make the biggest difference. So it's a mistake to just keep over polishing the same book for too much time. On the other hand, I've also gotten samples from clients that was hard to read because it was clearly a rough draft that hadn't been cleaned or polished at all. So the grammar, the punctuation, the spelling was all too rough even to really get through. So there's kind of a balance between, it's got to be readable and clean, focus on the typos and the punctuation. Don't over stress about the word choice, but at the same time, the really good writing and the really important story detail often comes in the final polishing scenes. So in this book I'm working on that's supposed to be due in a couple days, I've gone through it, I know what the ending is, I'm going through it again, and I'm finding there are a lot of gaps in the narrative where, I have to fill in, especially with description, scene description, something I tend to put off. So the story's there, the action's there, the dialogue is there, but I'm not putting the powerful scenes in people's minds. And the story has to be first, because if the story doesn't hook their attention, they're not going to keep reading. So that's why I focus on that first. But the scene description is what's going to stick with them long term, because it's the pictures in their minds. So I do want to be sure I'm developing the world enough that when they finish reading it, they have all these really powerful, beautiful images. This is a dystopian novel, so like the scene I just wrote, they're walking under a huge collapsed bridge. So things like that, where you're giving them the promise of the premise, or you're giving them what they signed up for. People who read dystopian post-apocalyptic literature, they're looking for, those kind of scenes. So I want to make sure I'm adding those in between my action. You have to be careful about where you put the description. It has to be in like a lull in the conversation, or where they're, looking out about where to go next. I'm also still finding typos, not a lot, but a handful of typos. And the thing I've noticed the most is using character names that don't belong there. That's something I do for whatever reason. That's kind of hard to catch. So I found 2 characters that are from a completely different series that don't even belong in this book. And then I found a couple places where I'd use one character's name instead of another character. I think that's that's something that my mind does. I don't know if other people's minds do that. And the other thing I need is to keep track of objects. So one of the other final polished things that you do, even when it's pretty clean and almost readable, is figure out, what are they wearing? When did they last change clothes or eat or bathe? And you don't always want to focus on those details, but a little bit of reality is important, especially when, so for example, they just broke into this house looking for something and they escaped. There isn't a good time for me to comment and say, she found these files and then she took them out, and then she has to give them to another character, because later those files are going to be important and I have to kind of put it in somewhere. So figuring out like the small important story details that I haven't written in the scene yet, or have been kind of left out. And so I said earlier, the important, like the really good writing stuff really does come towards the end. So now that I'm on what I would call not even my final polish, because now I'm introducing the best details. Now that the story is there, I gave one of my characters, he was always supposed to have some tattoo that had some meaning, but I never figured out what it was. So I finally figured out, that vital tattoo that's going to be really important and meaningful and powerful later on. So it's adding the increased drama and emotion and feelings by keeping track of the imagery or the objects that you're using. A book is kind of done when it's readable and clean, and it makes sense. Like, readers won't necessarily recognize what's missing, what you think should be there, what, you may feel like it's not your best finished, polished work because you see the leftover stuff that didn't make it. But readers aren't going to see that. So for them, this is still going to be a really good book. They may not know or recognize that it isn't everything that I had dreamed, which is okay. And only because I have a pre-order deadline. Because if I didn't have a pre-order deadline, I'd probably I'd give up or I'd keep working on it forever. And at some point, it's just kind of got to be done enough that you can move on. I've had other series, other books where I have really great, powerful scenes that never made it in the book because I couldn't fit it, or it would have required more revision or more editing. I would have had to go through the whole thing and, make sure it all aligns. So you kind of you do the best you can to tell the best story you can, but you may not, if it's 90% there, 95% of the way there, and the story is good and everything, happens, and it keeps readers reading, it's probably done enough at least to send out to ARC readers or beta readers or editors at that point. I would definitely edit it yourself before you send it to an editor or a proofreader, or else you're kind of just wasting their time. You want them to be focused on the story and the mistakes, not just dozens of typos on every page or grammar problems. But I'll also make a final point in this video, which is that I definitely am more of an editor. I tend to over polish and over edit. So we're sitting on probably 12 novels of backlog that it's my responsibility to clean up and prepare for market. And as I mentioned, the difference between if it's clean and readable, if it's good enough for readers to get from the beginning to the end and keep reading, that's the value. So we could be making a lot more money by putting out more content faster. And that's something I'm still struggling with because I like my novels to be really deep and meaningful. That doesn't equate to a monetary financial gain. So when you're spending more time editing and polishing a book to make it better, and there's a whole discussion about indie versus traditional publishing and then what you're planning to do with it. And I'm not suggesting you should write crappy books, because I think it's very possible to write really good books faster with less editing once you have practice and you know what you're doing and you're ready to market. But I will also say that there's an opportunity cost, to spending probably 2 months editing this one book, when if I don't want to say my standards were lower, but if I had a different way of editing, or if I just had a different bar maybe where, my version of a really clean book is different from the level at which it impacts sales or even reader satisfaction. I think my bar is probably higher, which is a mistake to assume that if you have a higher bar for quality writing, you deserve to make more money, or your books will be better received even, or more enjoyable even, which is not always the case. There's a lot of readers who want fast, fun, possibly silly. I don't want to say immature or crappy writing. It's just a different style of writing. So the editing that I'm spending all this time on may not be improving the quality of the reading experience to my audience. So that's kind of, I think, a really important piece of information to have in the back of your mind, where you may think you're making it better, which may not actually be the case. So it's kind of important to think about that. Of course, I think in your first few books, you want to do as well as you can. I also think there's a difference between over polishing a book that is not enjoyable and over polishing a book that is enjoyable. If you don't write to market, if you don't plot or outline, if you're missing critical story features or story structure, you don't have enough conflict, tension, intrigue, suspense. If you're doing a lot of things wrong, over polishing or editing that book to make it more perfect won't matter if readers are giving up after the first chapter because they're not enjoying the story. So that's something I think messes with a lot of new authors. They think they're improving the book they're working on when really they're flogging a dead horse a little bit. They need to be working on a different book that has more commercial potential when you're editing a book that has commercial potential and you have an audience and you know they're gonna like it, then it makes more sense to spend some more time at least getting it up to wherever your standards are. You kind of want to make it the best that you can make it. And this is also why writing is such a pain in the ass, because you're always getting better. So your standards are always a little higher. So you're always going to be dissatisfied with your own writing because you know that you can do better because you're getting better, but you also see clearer. So you're more critical of your own flaws and failures, which is frustrating. So you never actually get, you may never actually get better or faster at writing or editing your books because you probably have a writing style that's kind of true for you and your personality. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'd love to know what you think in the comments about your writing or editing process, when you think the book is ready or done, or if you have any questions about this topic, you can post them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks, bye-bye.